Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 26th of August, 2022, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me via video link, we've got Patrick Henningsen, Vanessa Beeley, Iain, Davies, and Mark Anderson. So it's going to be a busy news programme. So let's get straight on with energy. And of course, Ofgem this morning announced the raise of the energy price cap, which takes the April 2022 figure of £1,971 per year for the average household up to £3,350 per year for the average household from October. And then the forecasts are, well, they're actually pretty similar between the various organisations, but this particular forecast suggesting that the January price cap will go up to 5,405 and then 7,263 in April, 6,485 in July and 6,006 in October. So they're suggesting it'll start to come back towards the latter half of next year, but not by very much. And of course, these are only average prices, or average costs for average households. So if anybody needs to look after somebody at home, for example, that has health conditions that requires extra equipment, that's going to be much more expensive. Now, I wonder, where did this forecast come from? Well, it was this organisation here, Oxalone, and well, they have been widely published across the mainstream press. They consider themselves to be energy sort of consultants and so on. Let's have a look at what Ofgem themselves were saying this morning then. The price cap tracks wholesale energy prices and limits supplier profit. The current maximum supplier profit allowance is 1.9%. Wholesale prices for this winter have risen 360% since last December alone. This is driven by global demand and an aggressive economic act by the Russian state. They lied. And they continue. Russia has slowly and deliberately turned off the gas supplies to Europe, causing harm to our households, businesses, and our economy. But we can't force suppliers to sell energy below cost, or more will fail, and not only cost consumers more, but causes massive disruption, worry, and stress at the worst possible time, they said. And then finally, they said the response will need to match the scale of the problem we have before us, and government, industry, consumers, and Ofgem will need to work together to address the worst impacts of the crisis. And they produced this handy little infographic or to show the various breakdown of the various aspects of what becomes the price cap between the actual wholesale price of the fuel itself, network costs, operating costs, smart costs, and some headroom. So there you go. That is the situation at the moment. It is getting more and more horrendous by the second. Just before we ask why is this happening, Patrick, maybe we could just bring you on at this point and ask what your thoughts are about this continuing claim from the regulator that this is all Russia's fault.
Yeah, it's pretty surprising to see they're still kind of using this talking point and scapegoating Russia for the spike in energy prices. I mean, Mike, I remember just about 1 year ago to the day, or at least the first week of September, the UK column was raising the alarm. We broke down this problem, which was a spike in energy and power and gas, pointing out the fatal flaws in the wholesale markets, what's driving this. And back then, correct me if I'm wrong, my memory is foggy, but I remember that we identified two main culprits to this. One of them was quantitative easing and COVID inflation. Also, power companies were complaining about being short-staffed. If you remember, companies and substations were down tools. There were brownouts because of the lack of staff, because of quarantining, and then also green energy policies, net zero policies that have also interfered with the energy markets. The energy markets are hugely flawed. This sort of post-Enron free-floating wholesale speculators' dream, which is the energy markets. This is the fundamental problem. The system itself is broken. So there's no government solutions that are being proposed. So between green energy, between COVID and all sorts of COVID-related problems, and now with sanctions on Russia, they've caused problems and disruptions in the supply of gas and power because of embargoing one of the world's largest energy producers, Russia. This is why you have this perfect storm right now. And for them to be scapegoating Russia or scapegoating Putin in this war is just laughable in the extreme.
Yeah, so let's move on then and have a look at what comes next, because well, I'm going to suggest that smart meters are going to get quite a boost from this particular situation. And where are we heading with smart meters? Many people over the last number of years have been focusing on the potential health impacts of smart meters, and pretty much not really paying attention to what these things actually do. We are heading towards 30-minute billing. And this is very much about behavior change, because Patrick there talking about net zero policy. This is about behavior change and about net zero policy. And true to form, just a quick glance around the headlines this morning. Here's the Express. Energy bills, smart meter users could save hundreds a year through new scheme. We've got Evening Standard. How can technology help people combat the rising cost of living? This is the Manchester Evening News. What a smart meter is and how we can get one installed, because you need one now if you want to deal with your energy prices. Well, this is Energy Live News. Smart meter data set for 5-fold growth over the next 4 years. So behavior change, because with 30-minute billing, obviously people will be targeting the times of the day when the cost of energy is cheaper. And so they'll change their behavior appropriately. They'll use less energy, or they'll use energy at different times. But Iain, let me bring you onto the program here, because this last one, smart meter data set for 5-fold growth over the next 4 years. We just have this massive increase of data collection and data gathering and surveillance on how people are using or behaving in their lives. It's pretty clear where this is heading.
To control our behaviour through monitoring things such as our energy usage, and which is all part, I would suggest, of sustainable development. And also it should also be noted that it's a wild west in terms of data management. If we look at the way that, for example, NHSX managed the proposed COVID app, which actually turned out to be a failure before they had to go with a private provider, the data safeguards that were put in place for that data were virtually non-existent. And we're seeing the same across with all the data losses that are happening, obviously, with the social media companies, and now with the energy providers as well. What we're looking at is a new global market. I mean, the term has been used a few times that data is the new oil. That's not a bad analogy, because controlling the data, which ultimately, the zenith of that would be the issuance of central bank digital currency. Controlling the data will enable us to be controlled. It is very much about behavior modification and behavior control, and centralized control as well.
Indeed. So let's just remind ourselves what Mark Carney said a couple of years ago. We will not get to net zero in a niche. It requires a whole economy transition. I'm going to suggest that whether these price rises are as a result of policy, whether you believe that or not, which I absolutely would argue that the price rises we're seeing are as a direct result of policy, it's clear that the advantage will be taken to pursue this net zero policy. And of course, this is again a policy which is destroying people's lives. Now, speaking of net zero and so on, let's bring Mark onto the program. Mark, you published an article on the UK column a couple of days ago entitled 19 US states fed up with BlackRock's brazen efforts to function as a private government. And you highlighted this letter. Let's just bring it on screen here. And we'll just blow this up. And it says, based on the facts currently available to us, BlackRock appears to use the hard-earned money of our state citizens to circumvent the best possible return on investment, as well as their vote. BlackRock's past public commitments include that it has used citizens' assets to pressure companies to comply with international agreements such as the Paris Agreement, and force the phase out of fossil fuels, increase energy prices, drive inflation, and weaken the national security of the United States. That, Mark, is quite an incredible letter.
Yes, it is. And it goes on to admonish Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock. Of course, he's part of the big three in index fund management, along with State Street and Vanguard. It admonishes Mr. Fink to stop trying to influence policy. Any agreements that the U.S. enters into are the job of the U.S. Senate and their votes, not BlackRock. That is emphatically made to Mr. Fink, that point. And yeah, this is part of the larger problem that we've been witnessing over the years on UK Column and through other news outlets, 21st Century Wire, et cetera, the ascendancy of private power over government. We see it with COVID. We see it here. And this at least would explain in part the energy spikes you're seeing in the UK and elsewhere, this kind of financial leverage that's behind all this. Not to mention that they want to sell a lot of smart meters and make a huge profit, just like they want to sell a lot of vaccines and make a huge profit. It's part of this world engineering thing, but it's nice to see these 19 state attorneys general taking some definitive action. And what's interesting here is it's not UK Column saying that BlackRock is meddling in actual governance, actual policy setting. It's these attorneys general that are saying it. So this kind of vindicates what we've been saying for a long, long time about private power rivaling and then eclipsing government through Bilderberg, through the Trilateral Commission, through the Council on Foreign Relations, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think this is a very important development. A corollary of this that just came out in American Free Press that I wrote, I'll mention in passing, is that even the Financial Times, that Bilderberg-related paper out of the City of London, along with a Mr. Coates, John Coates, a Harvard professor, he wrote a paper called The Problem of 12 back in 2018, no less, 4 years ago. And he said that 12 emperors might come out of this financial juggernaut. And so besides State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock, there are 9 others that Mr. Coates named. And the Financial Times, even though it basically flourishes in a economic system that creates extreme concentrations of wealth, that's what the Financial Times is all about. Even so, the Financial Times is even concerned that BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street and 9 others are becoming the 12 financial emperors that will rule most of the finances of the world in due time. And so that's a corollary of this. And so extreme concentrations of financial power controlling energy markets, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, when going back to Mark Carney for a second, alongside that quote that we just showed on screen, he of course said that any company, including financial companies, which didn't get 100% on board with the net zero policy, would be effectively bankrupted. Do you think the likes of BlackRock and so on are using their financial clout to pursue that type of policy?
Yeah, all indications are if you're not in their arena of action, if you're not in the club, then you're kicked to the financial ghetto in terms of getting the finances you need, getting the leg up that you need to compete in the world economy. And so, yeah, there's a definite discrimination there. And it's interesting, briefly, that you mentioned Mr. Carney. The Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero is involved in this. It was launched in April 2021 by the UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance, and that happens to be Mr. Carney, the former governor of the Banks of England and Canada. And so he's directly involved in the, you might say, the solar system, the orbit of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and Iain, just very briefly, what are ESGs, and also just remind us about GFANZ, because that was something which was set up at COP26.
Yeah, it was announced at COP26. And also something else that was important that was announced at COP26 that didn't get as much coverage was the International Sustainability Standards Board, which was announced by Erkki Liikanen, I think the guy's name. And basically this uses ESG. So ESGs are a rating system. I think it stands for environmental, sustainable, and governance. I'm not quite sure. But it's a rating system for all assets. And the International Sustainability Standards Board, again, centralizes control of that rating system. So any investor that is looking to invest into a new project, say a new oil platform or something like that, that project will be given an ESG rating. And ESG ratings are backed by the global political class, So they are considered to be a safe rating. So if something gets a high ESG rating, it'll attract investment, and a low ESG rating, it won't get investment. So when Carney said, get on board or your business will go bankrupt, that is what he was referring to, because they control centrally, something I've talked about, the global public-private partnership, they control the ESG rating. And if they control that, they can make or break a business.
Yes, and then Mark, finally, then in your article, you were talking about the involvement of city mayors and so on in this kind of just this is something we've been talking about for quite some time. Just give us a brief update on that.
Yeah, naturally the mayors, especially the ones that define themselves as global cities, they want to take the lead on it. They don't want to wait for national governments to take action to conform whatever they can control to the ESGs that Iain very well described. So yeah, that's going to be something that the global cities will want to use as criteria to even be a global city and remain one. It'll be a defining thing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mark. Patrick. Sorry, are you muted, Pat?
Pardon me. I just want to add on ESGs 2022. If you look at the first quarter, the amount of ESGs in the first quarter is 87 billion of new money went into ESG funds. In the second quarter, a massive decline, 32 billion. So that's roughly a 62% decline. There's a lot of pushback. If you're reading the Wall Street Journal and you're looking at financial papers right now, there's a lot of people that are going cold on ESGs. There's a lot of complaints. So now it's becoming a political battle. So it seems like the business and industry community do not really believe that ESGs make any economic sense in the long term, because it looks like there's a decline in investment. So then it's going to become a political battle of brute force. And so it's going to be the Mark Carneys of the world, the people at Davos with their agenda, selling this agenda. And then you're going to have the real world and the real economy. And like Mark says, you've got the horsemen of the apocalypse, BlackRock, etc. Certainly they're going to flex this muscle. But a lot of people are complaining this looks like a way to keep people out of markets. And it has nothing to do with anything like inclusion or any real principles. So it could be a monopolist's tool at the end of the day. A lot of people are suspecting this.
Yes. Okay. And then Patrick, sticking with the inflation thing, the COVID-19 gravy train, if we can put this on screen, is an inflation driver.
Yeah, the COVID-19 gravy train set off in the spring of 2020, and it's still steaming along, believe it or not, in 2022. But we're feeling the effects of it, and it is one of the big inflation drivers, not just the quantitative easing and the massive money printing, but there's also a lot of knock-on effects. This is a really interesting story that out of the Washington Post here. Once in a while, there's something vaguely interesting in the Washington Post. This is one of those stories. So there was one of the many boondoggle projects that was drifted out during COVID, was this idea that they could train military veterans. So they allocated about $400 million to train people for various jobs, white collar jobs like graphic design and things like that. It's one of these classic central government programs that just, it looks good on paper, but wasn't going to really work in real life. As of August 1st of this year, only there were 6,800 veterans had enrolled in this $400 million program, and it seems to have only 400 people have landed new jobs as a result of this, arguably or allegedly as a result of this. We're not sure if that's why they landed the new jobs, but let's just say 400. So they anticipated 17,000 plus people would enroll in this. So what's the cost per job on that? 400 jobs landed, $400 million in public money. That's about $1 million. That's about $1 million per job. And we're not talking about, massively paid jobs. These are just sort of really average entry level positions in most cases. So this is a classic COVID relief program, and this just scratches the surface, not to say anything about all the massive fraud that's now being uncovered for businesses that basically took advantage of the COVID gravy train. And we're still riding that train. And the worst part about it is it's a major driver of inflation, and it will continue to drive inflation. And all that money is still circulating in these various programs, and it's completely skewed sections of the economy. So there's nothing good that is going to come out of it, or that has come out of it. It was a mistake from the beginning. All the policies that we've railed against over the years, lockdowns, paying people to stay at home, paying businesses to shutter, all of that it didn't save any lives. It did no good for society, and it absolutely tanked our economies, especially in the so-called advanced Western nations.
Yes, a whole economy transition, no less. Okay, thank you for that, Patrick. Let's move on then. If you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options for you to help us out there. That'd be very much appreciated. Or you can pick something up at the UK column shop. But in the meantime, do share any material that you find on the various platforms. Brand New Tube, you will notice, is still not back on this graphic yet. We'll be talking a bit more about Brand New Tube on Extra later on, so stick around for that. And then final little advertisement here. This is a tweet that went out 9 hours ago now. You too can help some soldier whose war you do not understand to maim or kill a child in Donetsk, says the tweet. Send what dollars, pounds, or euros you have left now, sponsored by Reuters. And this is highlighting a Reuters article that was published just a few hours ago. And the Reuters tweet said a crowdfunding website is raising money for the Ukrainian army by selling revenge messages to be written on shells before they're fired. And I'm glad to say that somebody responded to this by saying, is this Reuters just catching up with UK Column, who reported on this days ago? So I've got to say, Vanessa, welcome to the program and well done, because of course that was your report. I believe that was last Friday.
Yeah, and actually a number of mainstream media have picked up the story since then. Not only, it obviously fed by Reuters, but it was quite, obviously it's skewed towards being perfectly acceptable, that there is industrial scale crowdfunding for Nazi recriminations against Russian-speaking citizens in Ukraine.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, we're not going to talk about this Ukraine today with you. Today, it's all about sex education for children, or well, sex education. So, take it away.
Okay. Well, a few days ago, I picked up on this document from the WHO Collaborating Center for Sexual and Reproductive Health, in collaboration with the BZGA. I'll come on to what that is in a second. But reading through the front page of the website, the Framework Standards for Sexuality Education in Europe, in brackets standards, presents the concept for, bear this in mind, holistic sexuality education. So bringing in a kind of, a sort of a beatnik term, apologies to people that follow holistic lifestyles, but bringing this into this concept, when you look at what they're proposing as education, is horrifying, and includes information on the themes relevant for children and adolescents in the various age groups. So if we then look at what BZGA is, they're the Federal Center for Health Education in Germany, combined with the United Nations Population Fund, and the World Health Organization jointly developed a series of policy briefs on sexuality education. I urge everyone to go and look at the numerous policy briefs on sexuality education. That alone is pretty shocking. The policy briefs are targeted to politicians, not to education institutions and other decision makers, primarily in Europe and Central Asia. and provide them with short and comprehensible information on different issues regarding sexuality education. Being an advocacy tool, the policy briefs promote good quality sexuality education as an effective life course intervention. So intervening in the education of children from a political perspective is how I understand that, which supports children and young people in protecting their sexual health and general well-being. So let's have a look at this document produced by the BZGA and WHO. What I'll do, Mike, is go to the next slide, which zooms in. Now, bear in mind, this is what
well,
is being recommended.
before you do that, Vanessa, we just need to make the point. Sorry, Stephanie, just put that back on screen. We need to make the point, draw people's attention to the heading. This is for ages 0 to 4, right?
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Sorry, yes, but I just wanted to show that on screen while you did. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, bear in mind this is I guess I don't have children, but I'm guessing this is kindergarten age, 0 to 4 years old. So imagine, I mean, these are babies effectively. So let's look at the recommendations for sexuality education. And this is in the WHO standards recommendations. Enjoyment and pleasure when touching one's own body. 0 to 4. Early childhood masturbation in a 0 to 4-year-old child. Discovery of own body and own genitals. The fact that enjoyment of physical closeness is a normal part of everyone's life. Now, this is for children up to 4 years old, but it continues from the ages of 4 to 6 and 6 to 9, etc. The fact that enjoyment of physical closeness is a normal part of everyone's life, but it doesn't determine what that physical closeness is. Tenderness and physical closeness as an expression of love and affection. To gain an awareness of gender identity at under 4 years old. Talk about unpleasurable feelings in one's own body under 4 years old. Express own needs, wishes, and boundaries, for example, in the context of playing doctor. Well, I'm not quite sure what kind of playing doctor that would include, that you have to express your wishes and boundaries. Positive attitude towards one's body with its functions, positive body image at under 4 years old. Respect for others, curiosity regarding own and others' bodies at under 4 years old. Different types, so emotions, different types of love. I'll run through them because I know I'm up against time. But let's look at the last column. The understanding that emotions are expressed in many different ways. Okay, positive feelings towards their own sex and gender. It is good to be a girl or a boy. The attitude that their own experience and expression of emotions is right. And then that continues to under 4 years old, sexuality and right. The right to be safe and protected. The responsibility of adults for the safety of children. Now, what I want to draw attention to here is the terminology adults, not of parents. What this document does is completely erode and erase parental responsibility for their own children. It disconnects the children from the parent. This is, I think, only one of 2 mentions of adults, not of family. The right to ask questions about sexuality, the right to explore nakedness and the body, to be curious. Now, this is when it gets bizarre. So sexuality and rights for under 4-year-olds. Say yes and no. Yes and no to what? Develop communication skills, express needs and wishes, differentiate between good and bad secrets at under 4 years old. I keep saying this because I find this document and the recommendations just so shocking. This is equivalent to grooming for pedophilia gangs, in my opinion. I can't state that strongly enough. An awareness of their rights, which leads to self-confidence. And this is extraordinary. It mentions many times, my body belongs to me. So in this document for children, they are advocating bodily autonomy, having destroyed it in the general public for the working class and for the populations of global countries regarding vaccine mandates. But suddenly with children and in sexuality education, their body belongs to them. What does this do? Again, this means the child is being targeted to make their own decisions outside parental guidance. That's how I read that. I'd be happy to hear from other people. The feeling that they can make their own decisions. Social and cultural determinants of sexuality, values, norms. Again, let's look at the end column. Respect for no or yes. Again, I ask, what are they supposed to be respecting no or yes in context with as a 4-year-old? Knowing where you can touch, middle column. Differentiate between private and public behavior. Again, this is potential for enabling behind closed doors pedophilia and child abuse. Respect social rules and cultural norms. Behave appropriately according to context. It brings in context. It brings in caveats. And then if we go on, we come to 4 to 6. Now, again, I won't dwell on too much, but even 4 to 6 talk about sexual matters, communication skills, consolidate their gender identity. At 4 to 6, use sexual language in a non-offensive way. I don't have children, but I was a child. Between 4 and 6, I have no recollection of using sexual language in any way, shape, or form. Let's look at first column. Sexual feelings, closeness, enjoyment, excitement as a part of all human feelings. At this age, what happened to the innocence of children? Enjoyment and pleasure when touching one's own body, early childhood masturbation, discovery of one's own body and genitals. And the next slide. Again, sexuality, health, and well-being. Now, I've circled here. If the experience feeling is not good, you do not always have to comply. What is this language? You do not always have to comply if the experience or the feeling is not good. So on what conditions do you have to comply? Excuse me. The attitude, my body belongs to me. Mike, could you just continue for me for 1 second?
Yeah, so the attitude, my body belongs to me, again, and the awareness of their rights is the other one that you've circled.
Yeah. Sorry. And the responsibility of adults for the safety of children. So again, the reference only to adults and not parents.
Yeah, and so then there's another document you want to highlight here, and this is coming from the United Nations itself, and it's entitled International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education. It's interesting. I didn't really appreciate this when you sent the graphics over to me earlier, that it's the word that's being used there is sexuality. You're muted.
Very sorry. Yeah, so you have a mirroring of the language in the WHO document, but not very surprising when you see who is producing this document. UNAIDS, UNFPA, UNICEF, UN Women, the World Health Organization, and of course, Education 2030. So it comes under Sustainable Development Goals. Again, I recommend everyone goes and reads this document. The link, I presume, will be put in the show notes. But I wanted to highlight just a couple or one part of the document. Again, a bizarre wording. Sexuality is linked to power. I mean, this is an extraordinary thing to be teaching teenagers and younger. The ultimate boundary of power is the possibility of controlling one's own body. So again, we come back to bodily autonomy when it comes down to sexuality, education, divorcing from parental consent. CSE can address the relationship between sexuality, gender, and power, and its political and social dimensions. This is particularly appropriate for older learners. I mean, I just find the language in these documents extremely, extremely disturbing.
Okay,
And
so
then
so look, what I'll
sorry.
do, Vanessa, is I'll just run through this next little section, and then I'll ask you to comment on the bit at the end, because yesterday, I think it was yesterday or the day before, we received an email here which said, "Dear Brian and UK Column, I was recently watching one of your UK Column releases where you were discussing the sex and relationships education fiasco and how it's been imposed on all UK school children. I work in a secondary school, and this has been no small vexation to me," and so on. People can read the rest of it in a second, but they sent us some slides to go with it, and sort of this gives an indication of how this stuff is being implemented in schools in the UK. And so the graphics here, this is from the 9th of August 2022. I mean, the language involved sexting, nudes, and dick pics. We've got, is there any good reason to send nudes, sext, and so on? And then what do the letters LGBTQIA plus stand for? And so on. So Vanessa, just briefly, what are your thoughts on how this is being implemented at the school level?
Well, I mean, this is extraordinary. And if you notice, after there, are there any good reasons to send nude, sex, and dick pics? And the UK column viewer who sent the email objected very strongly to the use of this language. He said, although children use this language, to see it in an educational presentation is horrifying for him. And then at the end, they asked the students to come up with their own sexting story using these images as stimulus. I mean, you know, I just find what is going on is reminiscent of me, this divorcing from parental responsibility. It's something that we did see, although from a different perspective, back in Nazi Germany, of course, when children were effectively corralled away from their parents and brought into Hitler Youth. Other organizations were completely written out of the criteria, like the Scouts, etc. And this became a centralized education process for German youth. And we're seeing a very familiar process here again now. And I need to also say, what we're seeing is the normalization of pedophilia. And I'll come on to the next slide in a second. But so we've now had the normalization of terrorism, the normalization of Nazism in Ukraine, the normalization of global health tyranny, the normalization of inflation, as you were talking about, and now the normalization of pedophilia, who are now starting to be described, or in the last 3 years, are now being described as minor attracted people. And this was just one website that I found after a very brief and cursory look. Pedophiles talking about pedophilia. What is a pedophile? Well, guess what? Oh, God, sorry, Mike. Can you take over?
Yeah, okay. So what is a pedophile? It says, well, guess what? That means people attracted to children, nothing more. We're brought up by society believing that it means someone who abuses children, but that isn't what it is, according to this website. A pedophile is simply someone who, with an attraction, that can be good, bad, or anything in between. They can make good choices or bad choices or both. Sure, they can abuse children, kids, sorry, but most don't. A pedophile is just a term for people attracted to prepubescent children. Okay, and so it goes on. So why MAP, it says, minor attracted people is a term coined by researchers and minor attracted people themselves. And it is a term that simply umbrellas all people attracted to children, pubescent, prepubescent, and postpubescent, in a way that is not normative to their age bracket. This could be a 40-year-old attracted to someone who is 16, or someone who is 13 years old attracted to someone who is 5. It includes a wide group of people, says this website. This is intentional, since minor attracted people are not a monolith.
Yeah, and then they go on to produce a sort of Venn diagram, I guess, of the differences between minor attracted people and non-minor attracted people and non-pedophiles, people who are not attracted to children primarily or otherwise. I mean, this for me is a terrifying step towards the destigmatization of pedophilia, and the final slide demonstrates minor attracted person inside the growing effort to destigmatize pedophilia. I mean, through the education system, how I interpret this, and I'm happy for other people to comment, is that it's literally a grooming program for pedophile rings.
Yes. Okay, Vanessa, thank you very much for that. I appreciate the difficulty there. No, it's no problem. Okay, let's move on, Patrick, then to the next topic, which is COVID. And here we have, well, what's going on here? Big tech COVID collusion.
Yes, yes. So there's a court case going in the United States. I think it's quite important. A number of the members of the Great Barrington Declaration, people who signed on to that, if you remember, they're suing the government in the United States for collusion with big tech to censor individuals on social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. Let's take a look at what the lawsuit's findings have been thus far. And also, I might note, I have spoken to somebody who is involved in this lawsuit, and hopefully have more information about that next week. The CDC is actively feeding disapproved viewpoints to Twitter, Facebook, including a list of tweets that the CDC regarded as misinformation. So this will become more relevant in a second. But a lot of us who were erased from these platforms, including myself, for violations of whatever the terms and conditions or community standards of Twitter were or could be interpreted as. It's really under this banner. So who knows what the real story was? In one email, Twitter senior manager for public policy, his name's Todd O'Boyle, asked Crawford, who's a plaintiff in this suit, I think from the CDC, to help identify tweets to be censored and emphasize that the company was looking forward to setting up regular chats. So this is clear coordination here. This is obviously the tip of the iceberg on this. And so Jonathan Turley, who's a legal expert in the United States, this is what he said on his blog regarding this case. This is also quoted in the previous article I showed. Facebook also received lists of, quote, offensive posts to be dealt with. Facebook trained government officials in using its CrowdTangle software system used by health departments to flag potential vaccine misinformation to allow the company, Facebook in this case, to review and possibly remove the posts or the content. So it added that this is similar to how governments and fact checkers use CrowdTangle ahead of elections. What CrowdTangle is basically hoovers up data on social media, and then it's used to generate heat maps and things like this to try to identify the sources of misinformation. If you remember Kate Starbird from the University of Washington that ran that hit piece on me and used this as a sort of central focus of her research to track the source of the white helmets, misinformation, and all this. This is very similar to this enterprise software package, CrowdTangle. So this is also used to censor and suppress information, it looks like anyway, in the run-up to elections. Certainly we saw that happening in the 2020 presidential election in the United States. There's no debate that actually happened. So this is interesting. So here's the big question, and we'll go to the next image here. Jack Dorsey testified before Congress in 2021, and they asked him point blank, do you censor? And he says of his company, Twitter, we don't have a censoring department. His excuse was that censorship was tricky. Okay. So it looks like Jack Dorsey lied to Congress. Jack Dorsey, CEO, then CEO of Twitter. Notice how he jumped ship from Twitter just a couple of months ago, said he wanted to spend more time on other projects, blue sky projects. Why did he jump ship from his major baby, the company that he apparently or supposedly helped build up to this giant monopoly? So Jack jumped ship from Twitter. We find out that it's likely here Jack lied to Congress. So they're running a censorship farm at Twitter. They're in collusion with the CDC. Put this into perspective here, especially with the Biden administration. Okay, this has now come out, so this is all in discovery. So Joe Biden, 2021, look at this. Remember, Joe Biden said social media platforms are killing people by allowing misinformation about COVID or vaccines to be allowed on their platform. We dismissed this at the time as being totally ridiculous, totally beyond the pale, just completely outrageous that the president of the United States would accuse people of murder because they posted allegedly disinformation, misinformation. So it's quite an extraordinary thing, what we're witnessing here. And you also have to put this into context with a story that hopefully I'll be able to run through quickly soon, which is that the CDC has reversed all of its guidelines. So all the things that we got kicked off or censored or had posts removed or got suspensions for, all of the claims about vaccines not being effective, vaccines not being safe, or at least not being effective, or various COVID measures not working, that got us censored or suspended from social media. The CDC's now walked all that back officially in policy. Now, it's the same CDC that was in collusion with Twitter, with Facebook. So the US federal government or governments in general are locked in behind the scenes with social media firms. And they also have dashboards. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So let's look at that. Let's put this article on screen. Then CDC backtracks on COVID guidance as damning studies mount. This is from Mercola, and it says the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reversed its COVID-19 guidelines, thereby vindicating every so-called misinformation spreader. So continue, Patrick.
Yeah, so that's the starting point there. Now, CDC is advocating now for taking personal responsibility, for everyone to decide for themselves which preventions they should use at any time based on their own judgment, based on their own risk or risk of severe illness or in proximity with other members of your household that are sick. All these things are common sense, Mike. This was what received wisdom was before March 2020, right? Everyone remember that. That's now what the CDC is reverting back to pre-2020 logic and customs of modern society. And they go on to see he's also giving up on the discrimination-based COVID jab status, stating now, believe it or not, quote, COVID-19 prevention recommendations no longer differentiate between a person's vaccination status because breakthrough infections occur, etc. They also admit natural immunity actually exists, natural immunity actually works. So these are all big revelations here for the CDC. But here's the big takeaway. Now listen to this. So testing is now reserved for those who are symptomatic and have known or suspected exposure to someone with COVID-19. That's an incredible point there. And secondly, isolation for only those who are symptomatic and have tested positive, both of those things, symptomatic and tested positive. And contact tracing is now restricted to healthcare settings and high-risk congregate settings, et cetera. And here, the last policy walk back, the CDC's about face appears to be politically motivated in the run up to the midterm election. So Biden is trying to get a win here. This is an admission by federal government, by this administration, that these are hugely unpopular policies. And really, it's an implicit admission that they don't work, that they didn't work, that these policies would never work. Okay, but Mercola lastly warns here that the post-election, you're going to see the biggest gaslighting exercise after the midterms in terms of a push for vaccinations in the winter. So some restrictions may be brought back in. I wouldn't be surprised. Depends how much the media is going to hype up case numbers for COVID or whatever the next flu or whatever scare is. But look at this. And this begs the question, for instance, Novak Djokovic, he's not playing in the U.S. Open at Flushing Meadows. That's all based on CDC guidelines. He's not vaccinated, not allowed to play, not allowed to enter the United States as a foreigner. Americans can come in unvaccinated, but not foreigners. So why don't they just roll that back? Because the CDC's rolled it all back. Doesn't make sense. There's no consistency in the policies, but it shows you the government is basically collapsing on trying to hold this whole narrative up.
Yeah, well, so my question is then, Patrick, you've implied this already, but do you think that this is something which is just as fluid as it needs to be in order to suit the political temperature of the day? So because Biden's aiming for a win, they've made these statements, reverse this, but they could easily go back the other way come Christmas time or January, February time.
Yeah. The template is in place. The policies are there dormant. All the mechanisms for all of these regulations and restrictions and border closures and testing requirements, all of that infrastructure is still in place. And the key, though, is a lot of it is elective. The corporations are the ones who are opting to carry on doing it. And what was amazing is just on a straw poll, Mike, I saw quite a few people wearing masks as soon as I arrived at JFK Airport. I was kind of shocked. I would say about 1 out of 10, about 10% still wearing masks, even though there's no mask restrictions in public transport areas like airports, etc. A lot of people are electing to still wear the mask. So it's become a bit of a political statement, or maybe they genuinely are scared, or is that 10% or of the population that's paranoid? That's a hypochondriac or whatever, or a combination of all of the above. But it could easily be ramped up again, and certainly in Europe that would be the case too. So I wouldn't say we're out of the woods yet.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, thanks, Pat. Iain.
Yeah, very much echoing what Pat just said about it just being something that they can switch on and switch back off again. The point is that none of the non-pharmaceutical interventions that they introduced for COVID-19 had any epidemiological basis. They never had any epidemiological basis. As late as 2019, the World Health Organization put out a document about non-pharmaceutical interventions in relation to an influenza pandemic, and absolutely ruled out things like lockdown and the use of face masks and social distancing, and primarily because of the well understood fact that these things would create more problems than they resolved. They only recommended, the WHO only recommended those kind of measures in the most extreme circumstances. So there was never any justification, not from a scientific basis. And going on to what Pat was saying about people being cancelled, one of the people that stands out for me is Professor Nut Witkowski, who was one of the leading, genuinely one of the world's leading epidemiologists, the guy who coined the term, the R number. He was cancelled off social media for questioning exactly what the CDC are rolling back on now. So it's just a switch. It's just a switch that they can switch on and switch off. And it has no basis in science.
Yeah, indeed. Well, now, Iain, you recently published a couple of articles on the UK Column website with respect to conspiracy theories. And this was, of course, really triggered by the BBC's little mini documentary on the psychology behind conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that the BBC ran out, not a documentary called "Psychology Behind Conspiracy Theory," and the psychology behind conspiracy theory, which is the first article that I'm shown there, is again, it is full of assumptions and woolly conclusions based upon data that is unsubstantiated. I mean, one of the criticisms, a lot of it is based on experimental psychology, and one of the criticisms of experimental psychology is that the results can't be repeated more often than not. So it's not good science generally. That doesn't mean that it has to be bad science, but generally it isn't. Generally it is poor. And that also sort of led on to me to talk in the second article, why was conspiracy theory myth created, is very much based upon something that UNESCO have put out. Now, UNESCO's constitution it's in their constitutional document, which is when they were formed in 1944-45, that it is key for the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization that they emphasize the importance that they believe in full and equal opportunities for education for all, the unrestricted pursuit of objective truth, and the free exchange of ideas and knowledge. So this is their foundational document. But recently, if we move on, Mike, UNESCO have put something out called Think Before Sharing. It's a campaign which they say is to take, the idea of it is to take down conspiracy theory. They say that what they call conspiracy theory needs to stop. That's their language, needs to stop. So the reason for that, one of the UNESCO Director General, Audrey Azoulay, she announced that one of the problems of conspiracy theory is that it reinforces stereotypes which can fuel violence and violent extremist ideology. So they're trying to make this link between what they call conspiracy theory, and we'll discuss what that's about, and violence and extremism. And this is a theme that has been going on for years as they try to link all these things together. Now, again, going back to Pat's previous segment, they formed this what we can perhaps call the Thinks Before Sharing Alliance, which comprises of UNESCO, the European Commission, Twitter, and the World Jewish Council. So they are actively involved in policing information, and certainly Twitter are very much involved. And I would also point out that this alliance was formed in 2020. So it was formed at the beginning of the COVID-19 said pandemic. So if we move on to the next one, what they're talking about, Mike, is that they're saying that if we think about what they're defining as a conspiracy, so this goes back to the experimental psychology, and there are some formative papers, and one of the most formative is Understanding Conspiracies by Douglas et al. Now, they define conspiracy theory in that as attempts to explain the ultimate causes of significant social and political events and circumstances with claims of secret plots by two or more powerful actors. Well, obviously, if you're claiming something is a secret, it can't be known. It's either a secret or it isn't. If it's secret, you can never know what it is because it's secret. So, sure, information can be hidden, obfuscated, obscured, denied, but if it can't be known, if it's secret. But what these papers always also add is that conspiracies themselves are proven, they're real. So this again is a quote from that paper. Conspiracies such as Watergate scandal do happen, but because of the difficulties inherent in executing such a plan and keeping people quiet, they tend to fail. When conspiracies fail or are otherwise exposed, the appropriate expert deem them as having actually occurred. So if you and I talk about the evidence about what we suspect might be a conspiracy, it's meaningless because it's a secret. It only becomes meaningful when the appropriate experts deem that to be the case. That is the working definition of conspiracy theory that runs through UNESCO's campaign and the science, or the alleged science that supposedly defines it. So there are three scientists that the UNESCO, this alliance, used to inform their work, and they produced some documents which again shows how this theme runs through everything that underpins so-called conspiracy theory work. So if we look to Guide to Conspiracy Theory by Michael Butter, who's one of the contributors, he again defines a conspiracy theory as a belief that events are secretly manipulated behind the scenes by powerful forces. And again, we see in the work of Lewandowski and Cook that conspiracy, in what they wrote, the Conspiracy Theory Handbook, that again, this acknowledgement that real conspiracies do exist. The US National Security Agency recently spied on civilian internet users. We know about these conspiracies through internal industry documents, government investigations, or whistleblowers. So again, this idea that a conspiracy only exists if it is officially acknowledged. So if we move on, we can see that what the real definition of, not the definition that they are suggesting that conspiracy theories are supposedly meant to be, the real definition of conspiracies are that they are only identifiable when they are officially acknowledged or approved by government spokespersons. This is my summation of it. Recognized by the appropriate experts or revealed by the mainstream media. Until then, regardless of how much evidence there is exposing a conspiracy, it remains a secret and is therefore incomprehensible. While it is categorized as a secret, any evidence exposing the conspiracy must be ignored because none of it can possibly exist until the conspiracy is officially approved by public debate. For public debate. So, and we can see what the effect of that is if we look at what UNESCO are putting out as a way to identify a conspiracy theory. And I think it's important to acknowledge what a fact is supposed to be. So if we look at the definition of a fact is a thing that is known or proved to be true. And how do we prove something is true? We have to look at the evidence. So something is a fact when we consider the evidence or argument establishing the fact or truth of a statement. So the evidence is key. We have to look at the evidence. So UNESCO are suggesting that in order to identify this dangerous concept called a conspiracy theory, one of the ways you can identify it, if we look at point 3, is that the evidence seems to support the conspiracy theory. So what they are trying to do is disassociate facts from evidence. So, obviously, if there is evidence which suggests that a conspiracy theory may be true, then we can ascertain that by looking at the evidence, because that is the only way that you can figure out what a fact is. But they're not suggesting that. UNESCO are suggesting instead that a fact is devised by gatekeepers, by the people that the approved experts, the fact-checking organizations and the mainstream media define facts, not the evidence.
Right. So look, Iain, we're rapidly running out of time here. What I wanted to ask you was then, is it the case that I'd be interested to know what you think the online safety bill, for example, does to this? Does this put this whole notion on some kind of legislative footing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I mean, the idea is that if you can, I mean, it's a very similar concept, isn't it? The idea that there is a thing that is not necessarily illegal, but is harmful to adults. So you define what the subject is that is deemed to be harmful, or in this case, the government defines it through secondary legislation, which then will be picked up by Ofcom, who will then provide the regulations to the social media companies, who will then use the fact checkers and the industry that Pat was just talking about to police that information. So, yes. but more to the point, they are trying to associate it with extremism, and they're trying to associate it with violence. So they're saying that if this information can be deemed harmful, for example, questioning vaccines, because it leads to extremism and violence, and that's how they're going to, I would suggest, how they're going to allegedly tackle this problem.
Yeah. Okay. Look, thank you very much for that. Look, but just before we finish, I just wanted to mention this and get comments from you all on it. Actually, this is from the Grey Zone, and it's talking about Roger Waters, of course, formerly Pink Floyd, added to the Ukrainian government-sponsored hit list. and this is by Deborah Armstrong, and she's saying Russian political analyst Daria Dugina, who was killed in a car bomb explosion in Moscow on Saturday, now appears as, quote, liquidated on this Ukrainian online hit list. This is a website which is known as Meritverets, or Peacekeeper in English. So she's saying that a database which lists thousands of journalists, activists, and anyone else who's declared an enemy of Ukraine. But here's the key thing. This site was created with the tacit approval of the Minister for International Affairs of Ukraine. And so, and she makes the point that Roger Waters was critical of the Ukraine war on CNN recently, referring to Joe Biden as a war criminal and as fueling the fire in Ukraine. And that he had said that this war is basically about the action and reaction of NATO pushing right up to the Russian border, which they promised they wouldn't do when Gorbachev negotiated withdrawal of the USSR from the whole of Eastern Europe. Patrick, maybe I come to you first. It's bad enough that we have the situation that critics of the war in Ukraine on the Russian side are being added to these types of hit lists, and that Russians are being assassinated as a result. But now we're having Westerners, politicians that are outspoken, people in the public eye, including aging pop star or rock stars, being put on a hit list with the tacit approval of the Ukrainian government, and Western governments offer no criticism of this.
No, and also independent journalists. There's quite a few Ukrainian journalists, of course, Russian journalists. I believe Eva Bartlett, who we all know, she's Canadian, American Canadian. She's on this notorious hit list. So all this takes on an additional weight with the brutal and violent targeting assassination of Daria Dugina, Alexander Dugin's daughter, recently. So. Are the two directly connected? And we'll see if the evidence bears that out in the future. But just the fact that it exists, the fact that it's not being condemned by all the major gatekeepers of good and justice and the rules-based international order, like The Guardian or the wonderful journalists at the Times or the Washington Post, New York Times, any of the BBC. Whereas the Mariana Spring needs to get on this and condemn it. She needs to disavow it. And so let's play the same game they play with us. If you don't disavow this, then you support it. So disavow it, all the mainstream journalists, all politicians in Britain, in the US, disavow this death list being put out by the Ukrainian radicals. Otherwise, you support it. Your silence is violence, as they say in social justice language. So let's just drift that out there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. And Vanessa, since you are often on the receiving end of this type of vitriol, I just wonder if you've got any thoughts on it.
Well, two things. First of all, yes, Eva Bartlett is on the list and has been actually for a number of years now. And bear in mind, if we're talking about Twitter, that she was effectively doxxed by Louise Mensch, former Tory MP and chick lit author, etc., conspiracy theorist for their side. 2 days before she was doxxed in the sense that Louise Mensch called out or alerted the special forces, the NATO reaction forces, trained special forces in Ukraine, to her presence in Donetsk. And 2 days later, an attack was carried out on the hotel housing the majority of foreign journalists there. So we can't rule that out as being deliberate. But there's also Molfa Global, established in the UK by Ukrainian cyber warfare geniuses, that also have what they call as an orc book, orcs, of course, being the derogatory term for Russian speakers, civilians, and military. And that hit list is basically identifying them for assassination. So these kill lists are spreading and expanding. And so is the whole misinformation culture. There was a recent US State Department funded meeting in Ukraine again, talking about misinformation, controlling misinformation, describing it as terrorism, describing those that are deemed to be spreading misinformation as information terrorists and war criminals. So, you know, this entire concept is really expanding and becoming a very high risk environment for independent journalism.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Vanessa. And Patrick, let's just end the program then very quickly and introduce this little video clip.
Yeah, this is a trailer to a new film that's come out. It's a feature film. It's called My Son Hunter, directed by Robert Davies. He worked on License to Kill, Die Hard, The Goonies. And this stars Lawrence Fox, of all people, as playing the son of President Joe Biden. And so this is being put out. I don't know what the release in terms of distribution is going to be, but it's be available soon. I've just seen the trailer up. I assume it's going to be available on pay-per-view, probably maybe even on Netflix. We'll see. I don't know if it's going to get a theatrical release, but it's a fairly big budget, fairly good production by the looks of it. There's a trailer that's just been released, so it's very interesting. Let's watch it.
So I'll tell you what's going down.
You know who I am.
They told me you were VIP. All connected to the government.
What kind of a moron forgets to pick up his laptop at a repair shop? You're a Biden. Act like one. Everything he built, his life, I just ruined it all. I want to know everything that's on that laptop that can ruin my erection. My friends, it's time to party!
Didn't you know I'm taking control? I'm making appearance and I gotta go, cause I get them dancing with their hands up. Yeah, I walk in and they go bananas. I'm a bad, yeah.
I'm an artist.
Tell me how I can help you.
I don't deserve help. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I've been through worse.
You're the smartest man I know. Thanks, Dad. I just wish I could speak some sense into you. I'll never forget Corn Pop. He was a bad dude. No joke. Dad, we were talking about suffering.
I can't seem to find anything but positive stuff on the Bidens.
Who's the point man for the foreign policy in the Obama regime?
Joe Biden. So it looks like you need $1 billion.
So the obvious next question is,
Where's Hunter? I can remember getting paid some money, but I can't remember what for. Well, my dad says we never discuss my businesses, period. Or my cut.
what's happening in there? Joe's in on it.
Party's over!
You had everything, Hunter, and you threw it all away. You hope the laptop will take down everybody with you.
Get out!
Okay, well, we get the point, Patrick. That is going to look very, very interesting. Okay, well, look, we got to leave it there. I want to thank Patrick, Vanessa, Iain, and Mark for joining us. We'll be back in a few minutes for a bit of extra and lots to talk about there as well. Well, I hope everybody has a great weekend. We'll be back for the main news program on Monday, 1 p.m. as usual, and we'll see you then. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.